Canonical names for production: Clara Gies, Kang Jin, Park Dongmin, Park Mi, Dr. Kim, Taeyoon, Chairman Kang, Jia Young. Marble bites into her palms. The soles of her shoes slip on cold tile as she falls. The store lights fracturing into bright shards around her like a storm of glass. Tiny cotton onesies, pastel, embroidered, innocent, scatter from a toppled display and drift down, fluttering like snow against the glare of the luxury mall. For a beat that stretches and compresses at once, Clara only feels the hard floor and the swell under her ribs. A small, precarious life that sends a bright, animal fear straight through her. "Get out! A woman near the display?" hisses voice silken ice. Park Mi stands with her arms folded, a chisel of a smile lined with contempt, watching Clara as if the humiliation is a spectacle meant for her amusement. Behind Park Mi, a cluster of onlookers murmur. A few lift phones like small suns, capturing the collapse. The crowd's curiosity is the blade she did not know she would feel. Kong Jan steps forward, all the careless entitlement of a man certain of his world. His voice is too loud in the open space. "You shouldn't be here," he says. And there is a cruel twist that says this is more than a private rejection, this is property, image, a boundary enforced publicly. He reaches down and, with more violence than his words merit, pushes at her shoulder. Clara's teeth meet her lip. A sound catches in her throat that is not a sob, but a warning. People lean in like storm-watching birds. Someone laughs, the sound thin and phylloed with malice. Memory hits like cold rain. 10 months ago, the night of heavy traffic and heavier rain. The taxi door swung open and the drip of neon stained the pavement as Jan and his family turned. From her, like she was a stain they could scrape off. She remembers the halting breath of that night, the hospital corridor that followed after a miscarriage they never named in public, the whispered lies that followed claims about her instability, threats wrapped like apologies. She remembers how she left, walking away empty-handed, with a silence that Jan assumed would become erasure. This is the moment she realized there are some people who will enjoy breaking what they once pretended to love. Clara flinches at the push but refuses to shrink, curls her fingers into a fist in the pocket of her coat as if to hold herself together. Her hand trembles, and from within that tremor she feels the small, steady beat she has carried alone for months, a rhythm that anchors her more than any sympathy in the room. Someone calls out something she cannot hear over the rush of blood in her ears. A stone-faced security guard steps forward, badge flashing. But Jan shakes him off with a word that ends the guard's half-hearted approach. The mall's glass facade gleams beyond them, reflecting a world that would prefer a neat narrative. The rejected woman, the polished ex, the bystanders who choose to look away. A phone buzzes in Clara's bag. She is slow to reach it, habit hardened into caution after too many nights of being watched, but when she sees the name, the marble under her nails suddenly softens. The caller ID reads, Gizuk Kong. The world condenses to that one line of text. 10 black-suited men materialize somewhere in the periphery of her memory, classical music folded in like a scent. For a moment, the noise of the mall recedes, and she thinks, impossibly, of lavender baths and quiet kitchens, of the man whose hands once steadied her that stormy night. Jan's face tightens, because he recognizes the name and thinks it is a petty inconvenience, a well-placed trophy husband. A rumor accessory he can laugh off. He cannot possibly imagine the force behind it. "Stay put," Clara whispers into the phone before she answers. The word is less a plea and more a tether. Outside, engines hum like a low animal. In the glass reflection, her own face looks small and tired but unbowed. A door at the mall's entrance swings, and then another. A black car slides into the drop-off with a slow, articulate grace that announces a presence not by shouts but by the way the light changes when it arrives. Men in black move like shadows given edges, classical notes and old, quiet record rap, the scene in a chill that tastes like strategy. The crowd takes a step back. The laughter dies. Gizuk Kong emerges as if from a seam in the world, tall, composed, the kind of man whose appearance reframes a room. He is not a cartoon of menace. He is the careful architecture of control, one measured look, and the air seems to rearrange around him. Where Jan is flippant and brittle, Gizok is a calibrated stillness. When he steps forward, his hand comes to rest beneath Clara's elbow in a movement that is both possessive and protective. The crowd sees the contact, and cameras swivel. For a few charged seconds, two histories collide: Jan's arrogance and Gizok's quiet gravity, and the mall hums with the electric possibility of consequence. Jan's grin thins. "You with him?" he asks, the pretense of ownership masked in surprise. His voice tries for casual disdain, but the underlying question, how had Clara been loving on someone like that, splits the air with its implications. Gizek's look is a flat plane of restraint. He kneels just enough to meet Clara's eyes. There is tenderness there, private and immediate. A gesture too steady, to reassess, to promise. His voice when he speaks is not raised, but every syllable lands precise and unavoidable. "She's with me," he says. "Leave her be." Jan recoils, as if struck by a new law. He had assumed she would be inconsequential. He had not calculated a husband like Gizok. He had built his life on the presumption that people disappear when he dismisses them. He never learned to ask who they became in his absence. Security moves them to a quieter wing of the mall with practiced avoidance of spectacle. The guards keep the cameras at a distance, letting Gizok's men sweep the area with a competent silence. They don't need to shout. The presence of those men renders the crowd inert, like animals that sense a predator and choose another prey. Clara lets Gizok support her as they cross to the car. In the back seat, his hand finds the small of her back, not to command, but to steady. She tastes salt on the air, his cologne, and the temps of suppressed anger. He does not speak of the past in that moment. He does not need to. The tilt of his mouth is a promise he has no intention of breaking. At the hospital, Dr. Kim's face is a lantern of calm. "The baby is stable," she says, measuring Clara's expression with an economy of motion. The ultrasound screen shows a small, stubborn heartbeat that blinks like a lighthouse under fog. Clara exhales a sound that is relief and a vow knit together. The nurses move with professional rhythm: thermometers, a cotton blanket, the beep of monitors. The sterile light is refusing to dramatize. It simply records. And in that recorded moment, her breathing slows. Gizok waits in the chair by the door like a sentinel. When the doctor steps out, he listens with the attention of someone who takes instruction seriously, who understands that medical truth is a kind of law. He does not try to intimidate the staff. He respects protocol. His power is not only in menacing the world, it's in knowing which doors to knock on and which letters to write. He asks precise questions and receives precise answers. The result is simple and human. The baby will be watched for complications, and Clara will be rested. For now, the immediate danger has passed. It is in the hush after the doctor's reassurance that the narrator's voice, if it were a human one, in the room, would pause and say, "If Clara's story is moving you, hit like and subscribe to follow more stories of courage and justice." But that is a small, modern mercy folded into the air, a single breath in the longer story. Later, in the quiet of Gizok's home, one that is less a fortress and more of a curated garden of controlled angles, Clara sinks into a bath that smells of lavender. The water is a small ritual of safety. Gizok brings a bowl of hot kimchi jjigae to the edge of the tub and sits with it like a caretaker who knows the value of ordinary comforts. They share the soup without fanfare. A domestic improvised between two people who have weathered the worst and are learning different ways to stitch their days together. "You're trembling," he says at one point, watching a tendon in her hand catch. She could tell him all the things: how the miscarriage had hollowed out trust, how the city's lights sometimes look like accusation at 2 a.m, but instead she lays her hand on her belly and names what she feels. "She's here," she says. Gizok places his palm over hers. For a long moment, they just sit. No pronouncement, no strategies, only the shared heat of the soup and the quiet honesty of two people building a life from the wreckage of old mistakes. But in the same movement of tenderness, Gizok's features harden as thought re-enters his face. He is thinking of consequences, not out of vengeance, but out of a strange, efficient morality. People break others. Society must hold them accountable. There is a difference between being lethal in deed and being lethal in will. Gizok's will is formidable. He calls Taeyeon that night. Taeyeon is method in human form. Fewer words, faster results than most legal teams. He knows how to recover car cameras that are promised to legal fog, how to find a bank transfer that someone thought buried, how to ask a favor of a data analyst without them knowing the favor's full shape. Gizok needs discreet work, no headlines that could harm the baby, no public spectacles that would drag Clara back into the light before she is ready. Taeyeon understands the calculus. The fixers in his orbit are not sent to break bones, but to open sealed drawers and gather paper that proves the wrong kinds of men have been lying for years. The investigation unfolds like a series of tight, honest revelations. A dashcam, buried inside a compact car that someone in the Kang family's circle had tried to sponge from evidence, is located in a wrecking yard. The grainy footage is the kind that makes you sick to watch. The angle clipped by a blurred bumper. The shadows of a late night, the single careless headlight that could be a witness if anyone had chosen to look. Taeyeon's team enhances the clip, finds the fraction of a license plate, matches the pixelated logo to a model of vehicle known to be associated with Jan's circle, the little thing's mud on the wheel well, a strip of a logo on the driver's coat start to weave a pattern. Banking records are another slow-blooming evidence garden, a transfer small in its outward impression but suspicious when placed in a ledger where favors are. Paid links back to a private security firm with ties to the Kang family. The firm had been paid for services exactly during the time the 19-year-old Park Sein's life ended in a hit-and-run. Payments can be explained away. They can be rationalized. But in the hands of someone like Gizok, payments become a map. They lead to the neat, awful truth that someone had purchased silence. Of course, the Kang family has power. Chairman Kang sits at the center of a lattice that has bribed, co-opted, and quietly punished anyone whose voice might leak. Gizok understands that to uproot such a system you do not only confront the visible menu, unravel the agreements of convenience that keep their names from the papers and their crimes from the public record. He does not wish to destroy the company. He wishes to collapse the dishonest scaffold so that truth may stand. Clara is involved from the beginning in every decision about exposure. She refuses to be a passive instrument. She tells Gizok, when the idea of a public trial sounds like punishment that would reopen wounds for people like Park Sein's family and for survivors who prefer quiet, she asks for moderation and restoration, not the spectacular, but accountability. Not revenge, but reparation. When Gizok suggests legal pressure combined with social exposure, she nods slowly. Make them answer, she says, but make it right. The investigation turns up more than monetary threads. There are text messages, brittle with contempt, that suggest coordination and a silence as deliberate as the silence of them all the day she fell. A witness, an employee at a secluded parking garage, remembers a late-night exchange and a man in a coat who avoided cameras. The witness is frightened until Gizok's team offers protection and practical reassurance. A job at the Second Chance's home that is still only an idea, a safe place to speak. It is in this moment that Clara's sense of what justice could be begins to take shape. This will not be only exposure and punishment. It will be restoration. In a small, anonymous office, a prosecutor named Han Minko leans forward across his desk and says, "We need evidence that holds in court." He is not theatrical. He does not perform righteousness for cameras. He is slow and steady, the kind of public servant who believes in the scaffolding of institutions. Gizok provides him with the paper trail, dashcam stills, transfer histories, witnesses with new courage, and the prosecutor begins to see a case that is more than rumor. He promises to treat it with the rigor that could right wrongs without trading them for chaos. It is the kind of promise Clara can respect, even as it makes her stomach flip with uneasy anticipation. News, of course, finds hairline cracks to slip into. A small legal blog catches the scent of an emerging story. A suspicious payment here, a quiet inquiry there. Jan's name is not yet in the headlines. It is only a shadow in the margins. He lives his life with the blessed ignorance of privilege. He assumes consequences will not reach him. He has been taught to rely on systems that will swallow small messes without the world ever needing to make a fuss. That is a useful trait for a man built on advantage. Clara remembers the rainy night distinctly because its details are like a scar. An argument on a bridge about futures that couldn't coexist. A cab pulling away, a message sent too late to a phone that was left unanswered. She remembers the ache of an empty bed after the miscarriage. How strangers' pity felt less like consolation than accusation. She remembers the way Jan's silence was a demand to vanish. The memory sits under her skin like an ember hot and steadying. Now, with Gazak at her side, she realizes she can use that ember to help light other people's homes. Still, there are nights when shame clenches like a fist and Jan's silhouette rises in the corner of her mind, not as a man to hate, necessarily, but as a cautionary history. She does not want to be consumed by the need for him to suffer. The clarity she has gained is harsh but freeing. Forgiveness may be a thing she offers finally, on her terms, but it will not be an eraser. It will be a tool for her liberation. Gizak does not move as a man who trusts the courts alone. He moves as a man who understands pressure, financial, reputational, social levers that make the powerful stumble without a single violent blow. He does not call for crude public shaming. Instead, he orchestrates quiet consequences that ripple outward. A whisper to a corporate sponsor that a key account might be reconsidered. An off-the-record conversation with an editor who has long relied on the Kong family's advertising revenue. These are legal, reputational techniques, and they work in a world where image often matters more than truth. When the first formal press inquiries land on Chairman Kong's desk, the family's internal calculus begins to show thin cracks. Janice first, naive, then agitated, finally caught in a vertiginous slide from arrogance to fear when the severity of the evidence becomes clear. He keeps telling himself that people will fold before it matters. That truth bends to the right money. He is wrong in ways that are both sudden and gradual. The man who always assumed he could erase others now finds that erasure does not work reciprocally. Park Odongamin, the man who will come to matter most in the legal narrative, is at first the rumor of a name to Clara, an innocent figure who had been painted as guilty in a neat, bureaucratic way that corrupted his life. When his name finally reaches her, carried in a file with dates and names and the orthogonality of paperwork, she feels something like an obligation that is both personal and public. She knows what being falsely accused does to a life. It hollows the future into a small cylinder of despair. Gazak agrees. If there is one thing I cannot abide, he says, quietly, it is manufactured guilt. But the pieces are not yet all in place. They will be. There are still gaps. An accountant who has to be convinced to speak. A server log that must be pried open. A minister who has to decide whether to take a subpoena. Each is a hinge on which the next movement will swing. In a hospital corridor, Jan paces for reasons that are not entirely clear to him. He has heard rumors about a new inquiry, a word that tastes like something he has never been forced to swallow. He imagines himself as a man wrongly accused, a victim of gossip. He still cannot imagine that the woman who collapsed in a mall whom he had humiliated for his own mornings. Amusement has someone with the appetite and the means to dismantle his old protections. He lacks the vocabulary to understand what it means to be exposed. That ignorance is the axis of the title, a cruel and ironic center. He never knew his ex had chosen a man like Gazak. Jan does not know, in that precise moment between conference calls in fear, what the footage looks like when blown up, what the bank record reveals when laid side by side with a calendar, what the witness will say when asked and protected. Jan's world is still small enough to assume the best self-image can survive any public scrutiny. Clara, however, knows because she has been through the private crucible. She has learned to translate pain into policy. She has started writing lists, housing, job, placement, legal aid that will one day be part of a brick-and-mortar plan called Second Chance's Home. The idea lives now on a napkin and in the quiet spreadsheet Gazuk's accountant insists on formatting, but it has the shape of something irreversible. She imagines a place where women who have been shoved from apartments and pushed off bridges of reputation could sleep with steady floors under their feet, where babies might be welcomed without whispered judgments, where a false accusation could be met with a lawyer before it becomes a life sentence. That future is still a collage of hope. A nursery painted a particular shade of pale green, a kitchen that will serve simple meals, a small legal office where people can learn to document their days. It is, in Clara's mind, an act of reparation that will reach beyond mere revenge. She wants reparations that rebuild Liv's a job offered to Park Dong-min upon his release, counseling for his mother, a deed with Clara's signature on it if she has to fight for funding herself. The rain returns one night, a soft, repetitive percussion against Gizok's windows. Clara stares at the water and sees the night 10 months ago. Neon, a taxi's heated breath, the sudden hollowness that follows a miscarriage. She remembers the way Gizok found her, then how he had taken her hand, how his stillness had saved her in a way 1,000 moral lectures never could. He had been danger then. Yes, the kind the world whispers about and fears. But he had also been the person who made a small place of refuge when the city gave her none. That contradiction is not for simplification. It is the truth. A dangerous past may be lethal in the wrong hands, but in the right hands it can be turned toward protection and restitution. A knock at the door brings Tae-yoon in with a small, unassuming envelope. "We recovered the dashcam," he says, laying a printout on the table. The grainy image shows nothing. Glorious, just a blur and a headlight, but at its edge there is a meaning. A faint enough signature of a car. A moment that could be matched. Tae-yoon's voice is flat. "We have a payment trail. It links to a security firm that did the quiet, uncleared removal." Gazak takes the papers and studies them the way someone studies a map. "We do this through the prosecutor," he says. "We let the law do its work. But we will not let them bury it again." Clara leans forward, eyes bright with a kind of cold fire. "And Dong-min?" she asks. "He's been sitting in a cell for a year because someone needed a scapegoat," Taeyeon says. "If we can show the cover-up, we can get him out." That sentence lands and the room There is a human face to the legal maneuver now. A fatherless cousin, a mother who has been waiting at the gates, a life hollowed. Clara pictures his face. The feeling that rises inside her is not triumph. It is obligation, and obligation to make what was taken whole again, or at least to try. Outside, the city keeps moving, indifferent to the small legal storms that will one day make headlines. Inside, however, choices are being made to press charges, to expose truth, to make reparation. The mechanics are practical and mundane. Subpoenas file calls to journalists, quiet assurances of witness protection, but the moral spine that guides them is something stronger. A belief that power, properly wielded, can become a force for righting wrongs rather than perpetuating them. Kang Jun, back in his father's apartment, watches the world he knows start to shift like a temperature change he cannot immediately detect, but which will make his skin ache. He flips a glass of something dark and thinks, in the small, cramped thought world of a frightened man, that this is only a storm, that his family will shelter him. He has not yet imagined a future where the letterheads betray him, where business partners quietly distance themselves, where the beauty of his life peels off like paint under rain. He does not yet know that the man he mocked in the mall, whom he had assumed invisible, has built an arsenal of truth. Jan has never seen Gizik up close in the way a man sees the depth of another's capacity to impose order on chaos. He has never had to answer to a life he once broke. In the last light of that chapter, Clara sits at a small table with a blank sheet of paper between her and the evening. She pulls a pen toward her and turns the page over. It is a letter she has been composing without words, a kind of archive of the time when her life was ripped open and then stitched back, not in secrecy, but in firm, economic acts. The thought of Jan's eventual realization, his slow comprehension that his ex is married to a man who can and will force truth into daily does not fuel hatred in her. It fuels a steadier thing, the desire that justice be clear, not theatrical, restorative, not cruel. She writes one line that will mean more later than any courtroom pronouncement. "I forgive you, not because you are innocent, but because I choose freedom for myself." The rest of the letter, she keeps for another day. For now, she folds it and sets it in a drawer with a small, sleeping photograph of a child she has yet to meet. The evidence is collecting. The witnesses are finding their courage. The legal door, once locked by money and influence, now trembles under patient knocks. Jan, in his ignorance, walks toward a future he cannot imagine. Clara stands on the cusp of making a home not only for herself, but for others wounded by the same system. A motorcade's low hum returns to the street below, an echo of the day in the mall, a reminder that power can be a shield as much as a weapon. Kazak moves through the small rooms of his house with a deliberate patience. He admires, quietly and without words, the way Clara plans. Not for vengeance, not for spectacle, but for rebuilding. There is a hinge to all of this. A single piece of footage. A river of transactions showing who paid for what. And one frightened witness, ready to tell the truth, if someone will promise to keep them safe. Those elements, once joined with the prosecutor's willingness, will tilt the story from private pain to public accountability. And yet, the public reckoning has not arrived. The storm is forming, only its outer band has brushed the city. In a small, sealed envelope on Gizak's desk, a printout sleeps, a little rectangle that contains the shape of a man's failure. Jan, for the moment, sleeps behind closed doors, ignorant of the way the world is rearranging around the life he thought he could control. When the next phone call comes, it will bring a name, a time, a place. It will sketch the plan that will force a family to choose between image and truth. It will not be a moment of vengeance. It will be a maneuver of consequence. Outside the window, cherry blossoms begin to bud on image Clara has been carrying as a promise. A private metaphor for spring after the winter. She thinks of a nursery painted in pale green, of newcomers arriving to a place with open doors, and of the baby whose heartbeat she still carries, like contraband. For now, the narrative pauses on the exhale before a declaration. Power has shifted quietly. Evidence, once secret, now has advocates. The man who thought he had erased her is still in the dark about who she has become, and what that man beside her is willing to bring to bear. The title of his unknowing hangs over him like a crown of small, inevitable consequences. Clara looks out at the softened city lights and for the first time in a long while allows herself to imagine a ledger balanced, names corrected, people returned to their lives. The price for that balance will not be cruelty, it will be truth. And truth, once released, has the weight to change everything. The dashcam printout sits like a small, accusing photograph on the conference table. Under fluorescent light, it looks almost comic grainy. A smear of headlight across an unknown hood butt. The edges of that smear line up with a refrigeration sticker found on a jacket in a storage locker. The same sticker reappears in a ledger belonging to a private firm hired to clear problem nights. Taiyen moves with the patient efficiency of a man who has made a career of finding the truth no one wants to unearth. He brings in a specialist to clean the footage, extracts the audio frequency that confirms a vehicle's idling time, torreza GPS pinguzu, and stitches together the fragments until a pattern forms that could not be easily dismissed in court. Gizak watches the work without theatrics. His wealth, so often misunderstood as blunt force, here buys time and quiet paid analysts, lawful subpoenas, the patient coaxing of a reluctant witness. He contacts Han Mingko, the prosecutor, and gives him what the prosecutor needs. Not rumors and vendettas, but sober, documentable leads. Han Mingko takes none of it on face value. He asks for chain of custody, for validated timestamps, for phone records tied to specific locations. The team of prosecutor used to pushing against influence, a fixer who knows how to find a file. A woman who has rebuilt herself from a miscarriage and public humiliation presents evidence. In a way that transforms gossip into an account that can be read in court. The first formal subpoena lands on a morning when rain is promised but sunlight holds stubbornly to the windows. Chairman Kong learns that the company is being asked to produce logs of security payments and partner invoices for a discreet legal inquiry. He summons his advisors with a nodded patience. The family's instinct is repair. By the right silence, call the right favors, bury the problem in a legal retainer. But the ledger that Taiyun has unearthed does not obey the old circuitry of favors. Small transfers, routed through phantom consultancies, begin to look like a pattern. A security company that billed for transport services on the night of Park Sign's death is suddenly less credible. When its owner is tied by a chain of emails to a man close to Jan, Jan sits in his father's suite and watches the world tilt. First, in small irritations, a client moved to the periphery, a supplier asking for clarity, and then in decisions that feel like betrayal, a board member who once smiled at him now insists the company take an independent audit. A philanthropic partner who once hosted his charity gala withdraws. Jan's phone buzzes with the polite but urgent messages of people who are recalibrating their risk. His arrogance peels, revealing a hunger that he has never had to satisfy without his father's shadow. But the mechanism to move an accusation into a conviction runs on procedure. Han Minko cannot rely on intimidation or rumor. He needs witnesses, verified footage, a plausible motive, and documentation showing the cover-up. That takes time. Taeyeon brings a woman who once worked nights in a sealed parking garage. She had been paid to move an unhelpful car and told to say nothing. She is thin and terrified until Gazek's team offers what she needs: protection, a relocation plan, the promise of work when the process is over. Clara insists on something more than cash. She insists the woman be offered a position at the future Second Chances Homes Outreach Program. The woman, whose name is Min-jae, nods and for the first time allows herself to breathe in front of others. When the prosecutor calls a press conference, Han Minko speaks in the steady voice of someone who has learned to navigate the media without spectacle. He does not harp or he lays out the facts that can be stated without violating pending motions. Evidence has been collected that suggests a serious cover-up connected to a fatal hit-and-run. An investigation is ongoing. A formal charge may follow if the evidence proves admissible. The headlines that night are careful but relentless. Sponsors that used to allow the Kong family's brand to smooth over complaints begin quietly re-evaluating their positions. A fashion label withdraws a seasonal collaboration. A bank distances itself from certain accounts linked to a front company. Reputational pressure begins to bite in a way the Kang family had not expected. Jan's world collapse is not in a single dramatic act but in the small professional betrayals that strip away the scaffolding he had relied on. He goes to a board meeting and is asked, with corporate politeness, to step down from certain oversight roles until the inquiry clears. He is isolated in the manner of a man losing the trust he had mistaken for affection. His anger, once performative, turns inward and brittle. Meanwhile, behind the quieter gestures of legal work, Gazok pursues a two-track approach. He will not act outside the law. He respects it now more than he ever has, not because of some sudden conversion, but because the law, when pressed, can dismantle the very scaffolds that privilege uses to protect bad deeds. At the same time, he understands public pressure. He authorizes discreet conversations with a few journalist stories, framed not as vengeful exposes but as inquiries into corporate responsibility and the need for transparency. Those stories put a human face on what might otherwise be abstract filings. Park Sign. The bereaved family, a man named Park Dong-min, who had been labeled a criminal and whose life was broken by a system that preferred neat narratives over messy truth. Dong-min's release begins with a slow legal motion. Once Taeyoon and the prosecutor present a credible narrative that exists, dashcam footage that matches the car associated with the Kong circle, bank transfers from a consultancy to a security firm on the night of the accident, a testimony from Min-jae that places a different car at the scene. The judge allows a review. Dong-min, who has been in a cell for a year, is granted a bail hearing after the prosecutor moves to vacate the case against him. When the guard opens the gate and he steps into light, it takes him a moment to register "son" against his face. He has been worn down by the humiliation of arrest and the endless paperwork that turned a future into a sentence. Clara, standing at a churchside bench with Gizok, a respectful step behind her, watches as a man she has never met is given back a life that had been stolen. The reunion with Dong-min's mother is spare and grim and then luminous. She had spent months going to the courthouse steps, clutching a small photograph of her son. Now she presses her face into his shoulder and cries with a sound that is older than any anger or relief, pure, raw reclamation. Clara gives them both a card. A temporary apartment paid for. Job opportunities through Gizek's contacts, legal counsel to help clear records. She insists on dignity at every step. She refuses to let restoration be a handout that makes its recipient feel small. Gizek arranges for a small stipend to help Dongmin enroll in a vocational program. A former colleague of his father offers work in a small repair shop. A deliberate choice to give him steady labor rather than charity. There are legal consequences for Jan, and they do not arrive as a cinematic, instantaneous fall, but as a sequence of hearings, motions, and filings that culminate in an indictment, evidence admitted at preliminary hearings, enhanced dashcam frames, a chain of suspicious payments, of frightened witnesses. Testimony gives the prosecutor cause to press formal charges. Jan is arrested with the procedural finality of a hand on his shoulder. He has read his rights, processed, and taken to a holding cell where the fluorescent light looks harsh, not flattering. The press photographs, the door closing. For the first time in his life, Jan understands how small the world feels without his father's protective influence. At his arraignment, Jan stands in a suit that has never been for him a uniform of vulnerability. The judge reads the charges: criminal negligence, being complicit in a cover-up, obstruction of justice, and Jan listened. His family, watching from the gallery, shifts like a cluster of blown paper. Chairman Kong calls lawyers, whispers, promises, but the company board has already begun to distance itself. Members who once smiled at Jan's charm now have to balance legacy with the ledger. The public, fed a steady diet of facts and witness statements, starts to choose truth over polished denial. Not all justice looks like a prison sentence. For Park Sig's family, those who lost someone on that night, there is a different kind of repair. Gizek sets up meetings with the family, not as a parody of apology but as an attempt at practical restitution, counseling funds, an educational trust for the deceased's younger sibling. A formal statement acknowledging failings in how security and silence allowed a tragedy to be missed. Clara insists on meeting them personally. She does not speak in platitudes. She tells them what she intends: to help build an education fund in Park Sig's name, to publicly acknowledge the truth when the trial moves to open court. The family accepts help with an ambivalence that is understandable. Money cannot bring back a life, but for the first time, they have an ally who will stand where the company once stood to shield wrongdoing. The case proceeds to trial after months of legal wrangling. In court, witnesses take the stand with the support of counsel and the steady presence of Clara and Gizek in the back pew, support that is human and visible but without theatricality. Minjae, who once feared speaking, testifies about the late-night car that had been moved, and the men who had asked her to be silent. Her voice trembles, not from fear, but from the weight of telling the truth. The prosecutor lays out the payment trail, aligns the dashcam frames with and ties the threads together in a narrative that makes sense, not as vengeance, but as accountability. Jan's defense tries to parse plausible deniability, to say the transfers were for legitimate security work, that the evidence is circumstantial. But the pattern of payments, the corroboration of a witness who had been protected, and the blow timeline the prosecutor paints make a coherent picture. The jury returns a decision that is less a moment of crowd jubilation than the slow settling of a ledger. Jan is found guilty of obstruction and of being complicit in the cover-up. He is sentenced to several years in prison time that removes him from the velocity of privilege but is not intended as cruelty. For Clara, this is not triumph so much as a confirmation that the law, when pressed, can sometimes correct what social power had once warped. Jan arrives at prison not as a public spectacle but as a man forced to confront himself in quiet. He receives visitors only rarely. His father weathers media, storms, and financial fallout in private. When he receives Clara's letter folded simply and marked with no flourish, he opens it with a hand that still betrays entitlement. The letter is brief and precise. Clara writes, not to inflict pain, but to declare a boundary, and to declare her own freedom. I forgive you, she writes, not because I excuse what you did, but because I refuse to carry your weight any longer. This forgiveness is mine to give. It unfastens pain from my wrists so I can build more than you could ever break. Jan reads it alone and feels not absolution-y, does not expect it but the quiet sting of something he has not known before. the recognition that someone he once thought he owned has chosen herself. It is, perhaps, worse than hatred. It is the loss of the grievance that made him central in his own story. While the legal machinery hums, and the guilty verdict ripples across tabloid pages and quiet boardrooms alike, Clara's days become a collection of smaller, persistent acts. She signs paperwork to secure a building for Second Chance's home, a former blue-collar office block that Gizek's contacts help renovate. The building is modest, intentionally so. Warm paint, sturdy beds, a small legal room where women can meet counselors and lawyers, a kitchen that will eventually serve morning meals. Clara insists on hiring survivors when possible. Maria, Lynn, and Emma are enemies. Familiar now in the orbit of the home are among the first staff, each with a history that gives them both authority and compassion in helping residents navigate trauma and bureaucracy. The opening is not a spectacle. It is a quiet ribbon cut with a pair of scissors, a plaque with the name Second Chance's Home, and a table of pastries someone baked in a borrowed oven. The press is present but not allowed to turn the day into a show. Clara gives a short speech, clear, She talks about dignity, about the necessity of work that restores rather than about the need for a community to hold people up rather than reduce them to headlines. She names Dongmin in her remarks, not for praise, but to announce the concrete actions taken to repair wrongs, job offers, housing, legal aid to clear records, and a small scholarship for the family of Parksine. Months pass with the granular rhythms of rebuilding. Gizek continues to be a careful guardian of resources and a discreet partner in practical matters. Trustees arranged for the educational fund, legal support networks expanded, and a partnership with a vocational training center offers residents employment skills. He does not give speeches. His contributions are logistical, steady, and often anonymous. His past is acknowledged in boardrooms as part of his biography, but the narrative the home promotes is one of agency people reclaiming their lives with support, not being saved in melodramatic arcs. At the hospital the second time, the atmosphere is different. Labor is a quiet, intense work. Dr. Kim moves with a calm competence that has steadied Clara once before. Gizek stands, present, but not domineering, a hand resting on a chair near the bed. Nurses move with practiced tenderness. The baby emerges into the world with a resilient wail-non graphic, humanly noisy, the declaration of a life that will have its own contours. They name her G.I. Young. The name carries layered meanings: grace, wisdom, bravery. It is the small litany of qualities Clara wants to usher into her daughter's life. The hospital room is full of ordinary intimacies. A small blanket wrapped around a newborn, the exhausted laugh of a mother who is already mapping a future. The soft squeezing of two hands, as if measuring the kind of partnership they are trying to make. Gizek kisses Clara's forehead, his gesture simple and precise. And in that moment, public personas recede into something private and resolute. In the months that follow, the Second Chance's home finds its rhythm. The nursery is painted the pale green Clara had imagined. Jia Young's name is embroidered on a small blanket that hangs in the window as a charm. Maria leads a job readiness class. Lynn runs counseling sessions. Amara organizes communal meals that knit the residents into a tentative family. Dongmin takes a job repairing bicycles, his calloused hands steady in a way that shows his rehabilitation is not only legal but practical. He volunteers to teach younger residents a trade, turning his own restart into a way to help others begin again. Publicly, the Kang family endures consequences that are not purely punitive, but corrective. The company pledges to adopt more transparent oversight for security spending. A corporate apology is issued to Parksine's family, measured and mediated through legal counsel, and a fund is established to support victims' families in the city. It is not grand theater. There is no cinematic confession on a bridge. There is paperwork and payment and, hopefully, a slower, more honest reckoning with how power had been used to silence truth. Jan spends his days in a cell with a television that gives him other people's news and a desk where he can read the steady bulletins of lost advantages. Without the adoration of his social circle, he must invent a future without the scaffolding he once assumed. There are no easy conversions. If anything, his days are a piece-by-piece dismantling of a life built on unexamined privilege. When Clara's letter arrives, he keeps it folded, reading and rereading the line that declared her liberation. He writes nothing back. In quiet moments, he stares at the blank page that was once full of promises offered to others and realizes, too late, that he has been the one left alone with his choices. Clara's forgiveness is not broadcast as magnanimity. It is private and precise. A letter folded and placed in an envelope, given to a prison official to hand. The act of giving it of, choosing to let go rather than clutch at an ever-renewing grievance frees her from a longer arc of living in relation to Jan. That freedom opens space for action. She devotes herself to making sure the home never becomes a shrine to her suffering but, instead, a working institution that offers real services, legal clinics, job training, childcare, counseling, and a small microgrant program for women who want to start small businesses. There are nights when the past arrives in ways that are not legal but human. A neighbor's raised eyebrow, a flash of a headline, an unsolicited comment from someone who believes scandal is still the only language of story. Clara meets these moments with a steadiness earned from months of rebuilding. She has learned to be strategic about where she invests her energy. She writes policy memos in the afternoon and reads to children in the evening. Her life is stitched through with purposeful acts rather than grand pronouncements. At a small gala 6 months after Jia Young's birth, the home hosts, donors, and community leaders, Gizok stands near the back, not as a figure to be lauded but as a quiet pillar who understands resources and restraint. Clara addresses the crowd, and her speech is not about revenge or the downfall of a man. She speaks of responsibility, corporate responsibility, community responsibility, the human obligation to repair what power breaks. She announces a bursary for victims of false accusation and a legal aid fellowship. People stand and applaud, but the applause is not the point. The point is that a series of practical levers exist now: housing, legal aid, steady employment that did not exist before. At night, when the city is soft and the cherry blossoms outside the home begin to sprinkle petals like tiny, pale confessions, Clara sits on the balcony with Ga Young asleep in her arms. Gazak joins her, a cup of tea warming both hands. They do not need to narrate their lives for each other. They exchange small truths. Who will check on a resident tomorrow? Which donor needs personal thanks? Which family requires extra counseling this week? The life they have built is a daily set of modest choices that add up to policy and sanctuary. Once, long ago, Clara had imagined that redemption would look like public vindication. Now she sees it in the steady availability of beds. In an accounting office with a new code of ethics, in Dongmin's quiet smile as he teaches a young woman how to tune a bicycle. The moral economy she envisions is not theatrical. It is practical and unromantic, made of deeds rather than declarations. When Jia Young has her first cherry blossom season, Clara takes her to the small park behind the home. She holds the child up as petals fall around them, image repeated for the cameras of friends. Yes, but more importantly, a private talisman of what resilience looks like. Gizak pulls out his phone and snaps a reluctant photo. And for one small instant, both of them are simply people witnessing their daughter in a world that has bruises, but also the possibility of mending. Jan reads of these images in a newspaper at the prison visiting room, and feels again the quiet of being excluded. He keeps the letter Clara sent in a drawer of the cell, a folded object that will not be returned. The world that had once belonged to him has contracted to paper and memory. There is time now, a slow, hard currency he never expected to possess. Clara continues to send resources where they are needed, not asking for credit. The home takes on cases: a woman fleeing an abusive household, a refugee in need of legal status, a mother who must return to school. The staff teaches not only how to survive but how to document and defend a life in a system that can be indifferent. Clara's voice sometimes trembles when she tells a room of donors about the night in the mall, but she always returns to the same imperative: change systems, protect the vulnerable, and make sure no one else is quietly erased because a family prefers comfort over truth. On a night not unlike the one 10 months before the air cool, The city lights steady. Clara stands on the balcony with Gizok and Ji Young asleep inside. She feels not a neat ending, but a long, honest continuation. There are court appeals and bureaucratic storms still to weather. There are nights when a child cries and she cannot sleep for worry. Yet there is also a ledger being balanced day by day. A released man taking back a life, a grieving family receiving an acknowledgement, a home opening its doors to steady work. She thinks about the man she once loved and the man she once needed to outrun. She thinks of the letter she folded and sent, the one that did not absolve him but unshackled her. Forgiveness, she has learned, is a pragmatic act. It is a closing of one ledger to allow the opening of another. Outside, a branch of cherry blossoms drops a single petal onto the balcony rail. For a moment, the world holds it. They're delicate, improbable, insistently alive. Clara touches the petal and smiles, not because everything has been made perfect, but because small, faithful human work has begun to cover the wounds. If this story has moved you, tell us below. Do you think forgiveness freed Clara or Jan? Subscribe for more stories about second chances and the hard, steady work of justice.